Hello, Business English 1 students. Here we are in Studio 2. I wanted to post a video about several different subjects that have been covered both either in the material that I posted or in the book with Professor Zhivkovic. Really, it's about packaging, which you've had assignments with already, especially regarding commercial packaging. And then there's bulk packaging or large-scale packaging and the various objects and storage devices used for them. So I'm going to briefly comment on those and some of the terminology. Then there's storage in general. That'll be a brief topic. And then finally, transport. So what I wanted to start with, in which I haven't had a chance to comment on, but we would if we were in class, is this in Unit 5. And it's called, you have this delivery process. And here it says packing and dispatch. And then we have these packing containers. So briefly, while there are quite a few different definitions here, what I wanted to point out is that they're essentially very similar to one another, and then of these 10 or 12 different things that are listed here, it's really just a few categories that we have to remember and then differentiate between the containers in those categories. So I think the best way to remember this is that if we put them in three groups, we have the generic, and then we have the more precise or subcategories within those more precise materials within those generic definitions. So the first category is the shortest, and that's simply bag, right? And we all know what bag is, right? So there's no need to get into that. Then just within that category, you have the other option, and that's really the only other option in that category is a sack. And a sack is basically an industrially large bag. It's usually made from some tough, durable fabric that's resistant to tampering. So often it's made from canvas. Jute is the material they talk about in the book. It can be made from a thick cloth or burlap, some kind of rough fiber. And then when we talk about these containers, it's also not only what they're made of or what size they are, but what goods they carry. So generally, these are used for dry items that are commodities of some type, like basic goods. Things like coffee, sugar, potatoes, onions, and flour. That would fall in the sack category. So the next category is, well, if we use the generic term, it's the box, right? So within the box category, we have carton, case, and crate. So the definitions are all there in your book, but it's a good way to remember them is just to think about them as kind of a hierarchy of box shapes. So if box is the generic one, then you have carton. And when we think about carton, it's usually smaller than a box, but not always. So it's usually made of, now carton in Serbian, karton, is cardboard. So that's not the same thing in English. A carton is a type of box, but it often is made of cardboard. It can also be made of fiberboard, compressed paper. It sometimes can have compartments inside. And so when we think about cartons, then sometimes they go in a box, and there's a few good examples that can help us remember what a carton is. We say carton of eggs, cartons of fruit. Often they're used with these easily damaged items to provide a basic insular packaging. And then we have the weird exception, which is carton of cigarettes. In a carton of cigarettes, you actually have, like, most time, cartons go into a box. With cigarettes, a box goes into a carton. So a carton of cigarettes is 10 and is 10 boxes. And normally it would be a box has 10 something. 10 cartons, for example. So then we go with crate. Crate is a step up. So we go carton, box, crate. Crate is generally, before crate we go to case. So a case is generally a larger, stronger container. It's a box with generally a hard surface or material. So wood, a very durable plastic, like a case of beer would be, high level plastic and you can stack these onto each other. You have crates of milk, crates of beverages, cases of milk rather, cases of wine. So a case is a large, strong container, often made of wood. for transporting things like glass items, bottles, etc. And then a crate is a very large wooden box that's open at the top and it's kind of fence-like. And often a crate will contain cases, boxes, and cartons inside of it. At the bottom, a crate usually has, we call it palet in Serbian, and you have that palet at the bottom, that's the bottom of the crate, and you have room there for a forklift to operate it. And to lift it up and down. So a crate is kind of like a fence-like layer around the other boxed items. And then the final category in which these things are similar is variations on the tin or the can. So tin and can are the small elements, and these are made of metal, and we're used to seeing these. You know, they are transport like sardines, tuna, things like this, canned food, tinned food. A slight variation on that would be the jar, which is simply a tin, but it's glass. So then we have the larger versions of this. So a drum is a large cylinder, usually made of metal, and it's commonly used for chemicals or dangerous or corrosive liquids, paints, oil, gas. And then a barrel is two different ways. A barrel can sometimes be more or less the same thing as a drum, but only for certain products. We say barrel of oil, but it's really a large drum. Most of the time when we talk about barrel, we are talking about a large cylindrically shaped container, usually made of wood with metal rings, often used for storing or aging liquids, like barrels used to age wine, barrels used to age beer or whiskey or other items, vinegar in that category. So those are the large elements. So we have the one that's probably least used, that's a carboy. A carboy is it's like a bottle, except it's much larger. It generally has a shape that's narrow at the top and then wide at the bottom. Here in Serbia, you see them used for rakia quite a bit, or fermentation. They can be done for small-scale fermentation. And these are very breakable, so they often need other protection around them, but they are very good for storing volatile chemicals because glass does not interact with those chemicals. So things that are highly acidic or highly alkaline are often stored in these carboys. So industrial liquids that could compromise metal or wood or even plastic can be stored in these kind of containers. So there's a few additional terms that come up. You have these specimen sentences also on page 43 in your book, and there's a few words that come up here. They mention adhesive, and that's a term that's not defined in the book, but I think it's useful to define it. So that simply just means something sticky, right? Like adhesive tape. There's tape that's not adhesive, and adhesive tape is sticky tape, right? Reinforce is also used here, and so when you say reinforced, it means added protection or to provide additional structure or support. And then the final term is dispatch. That's actually in the title, but dispatch simply means to either get rid of something or to send it. So dispatch is the sending away of something. So that's some quick commentary on packaging. Now, related very closely to packaging, but slightly an extension of it, is storage. And that's if we look at where that comes up, then we have it mentioned in our book. I'm trying to find, that's actually from Unit 4. And here, when you think about storage, the most essential thing is to think about what are the basic purposes of storage, where does it happen, and what services are we looking for. So the basic storage, which is just put things there and leave them there, is there to accomplish three essential functions, right? Storage exists because you need to either preserve, protect, and possibly even improve the quality of the goods that are being stored. Storage reduces transportation costs, and this happens by allowing products to be closer to their consumer base. So you don't have to do as many individual transports or distribution if you have storage in multiple places. And because they're in multiple places, they are closer to the consumer base. So less shipping, closer to the customer, and protection of the items. There's also some additional elements related to storage. So we're going to talk about briefly services that are provided. But first, there are different kinds of storage facilities. So the most common is a term that you're probably familiar with. It's the warehouse. But there are different types of warehouses. So I want to at least briefly comment on the main three. So the customs or bonded warehouse is the place where imported goods are stored under customs control in a designated place, and it's under the control of the government. They're there to be evaluated until they can pass through customs. Then you have public versus private. Now, public does not mean necessarily that it's owned by the government. It simply means that it's open for public use. So if you are shipping your goods and you want to store them somewhere, this is not your own warehouse. You're simply getting public access, which means you can pay a storage facility to store your goods in their warehouse or in their storage facility. So that's a public warehouse. And a private warehouse is usually a place owned by, let's say, a corporation for its own storage purposes. So that's a private warehouse. It's for the use only of that particular company, unless they want to rent out space. So those are the three main warehouses. One is government controlled and it's related to customs. The other one is public, which basically means it's open to various customers and you pay for access to it. And then you have private, which is devoted to the commercial purposes of one private company. So outside of just protecting things, storage also can provide, or warehouses can provide other functions. And so we're going to talk briefly about those. So one of those is to grade the products. So grading here means to sort and arrange products according to size or quality. This is often used for agricultural products. For example, you have grade A eggs, grade B eggs, and that's based on their size, maybe their appearance. It can also be used for dividing fruit from high-level fruit or grains, what's going to go for human consumption, what's going to go for animal consumption. So mostly grading is done on agricultural products, cherries, cheeses, wine, eggs, milk, dairy products, grains, and other food supplies. Then that's an additional service, and you would have to pay for that. Then you have another element which is related to quality and actually improving the quality of items, and that is curing. So curing is basically the preservation of items through the use of salt or smoke or sugar or dryness or a combination of all of those to improve the product. So curing is, you're not curing the product, but you are in a way preventing it from being compromised by other agents. And when you think about compromised by other agents, you often think of like bacterial agents, pests, and that's where these other services come in. So you have disinfection or cleaning, simply the removal of biological agents. So disinfection, yeasts, molds, fungi, etc. are eliminated, as well as bacterial or potential viral impacts. Then you have fumigation. Now, fumigation is used on, it's different. You're protecting your goods, but instead of aiming it at microbiological agents, you're aiming it at macrobiological agents like insects and rodents, etc., small animals. Then you have inspection. This is close to grading. When you're inspecting something, you're simply checking for quality according to regulations or standards. And then there's also simply aging. This is something we're familiar with. Storage facilities can simply allow your product to age, but that's really related to their essential function of storing the items. It's just they can do it for a long time, and that might cost more money. So things like wine and other alcoholic beverages often improve with age. So do some meats, so do some cheeses, and you probably want some particular conditions in order to make that aging possible. So again, you can control humidity, temperature, and one of those basic services, temperature control, and other conditions to ensure that the product is not only protected, but that it improves. So This brings us to the last theme that I want to talk about today, which is transport. And of all the themes that we've mentioned here today in this video, and have been talked about over the last few weeks in the main lecture, this is the one that I think the book covers the most poorly. Here you have transportation, and this is on page 44 and 45 of your book. When we think about transportation, we want to look at it from the perspective of what is the best option for me as a commercial enterprise, as a private business. If I'm going to send or receive items, then how do they get from me to their eventual destination, or from the destination that I ordered them from to me? So there are advantages to each. And so when we think about transportation, we want to analyze the four major types of transportation based on several considerations: cost, security, speed or time, access or the areas available, and some other considerations like size and weight limitations. So basically cost, I mentioned first, but that's the factor that is generally determined by all of these other elements. So then for each of these, we have the four different main types of transport. We have air transport, we have rail transport, we have shipping transport, and we have wheeled transport or truck or automobile transport. So road, rail, sea, air. Those are our four. So we'll get to cost. That's the last one we're going to talk about. But when we think about each of these other items, we can kind of evaluate which of these transports are the best or worst in these individual categories. So if we were in class, we could have a discussion about this and kind of build towards our conclusions, but I'm going to do that for us given our current state of affairs. So when we think about security, then I think there's an obvious winner here. Often the transport that is the most secure is the one that has the most security measures, and is the hardest to infiltrate, and in which the least mistakes occur. So the clear winner here is air, right? If you've ever been on an airplane, then you know that it's pretty hard to get on an airplane these days. You have to go through multiple security checks. You have to documentation. You often have to wait in lines. So that's pretty much what goods are going through when they're getting flown about the world. The most security measures and oversight and regulation are present in the airline industry. So that's the most secure. Rail is the second most regulated. They have timetables. They are on set rails. They are also, we have train stations, just like we have airports, where trains are departing and arriving from, and we have pretty close oversight of goods. So those would be the second most secure. Then we have the two left, which is road and shipping. And essentially, these are where the most risks are. Like, if you want, another thing to consider is, why are air and train more secure is because who's in charge of that transportation? Like, it's pretty hard to become a pilot. It takes extensive training. And you also need extensive training to be a conductor of a train. Now, if we think about shipping or, the roads, then almost anybody can have a boat and drive it, and almost anybody can have a car and drive it, and you don't need a whole lot of special licensing. There are additional licenses for commercial production and for commercial vehicles, but there are lots of risks out there when you are on the road, and there are lots of risks out there when you are in the sea. So I think that while one could argue one or the other, I think that shipping is probably the most risky. Not only is there a lack of regulation on the high seas, piracy, which continues to exist, even if it sounds like an anecdote from the past. If stuff does happen at sea, your stuff is generally either gone, like it sinks to the bottom of the ocean or the sea, compromised by water to such an extent that it's not good anymore, it's stranded somewhere on the water or on land that you bumped into, and like I said, it's very unregulated. So Roads are also less regulated than rail or air, and there's a lot of humans and human error on the roads, and you also have weather play a major role, as it can play in all of these, but it's the least regulated besides shipping. So security goes air, rail, road, sea. So let's take a look at one of these other considerations. We talked about security. Let's talk about speed. Here, again, I think we have a clear winner, but that depends on where you are. So for long distance, maximum speed, clearly air wins, right? And that's not even open to discussion, right? It can go the fastest. But that's theoretical. Rail can go the second fastest, road can go the third fastest, and shipping can go the fourth fastest. That's just the essential maximum speed. So that's one easy answer as far as that. But for depending on where you are, then and what other factors are involved, air may not be the quickest way to get your goods from one place to another. So simply, and that's related to these other categories. So we'll say that theoretically, air is the fastest, and rail is the second fastest. They can go the fastest, and there are the least amount of barriers. Rail stops at borders and train stations. That's about it. Air stops at airports, and that's it. Whereas roads are constantly interrupted either by other vehicle or vehicular traffic or people or traffic lights or traffic itself. And shipping, well, it's just hard to move through water. They're slow. So that doesn't always mean, like I said, that your items are going to get from one place to another most quickly by air, but that depends on your access to it. So let's take a look at that as the next category. So access is basically your ability to interact with the transport and how available it is. So here, no matter what you're sending, it's eventually probably going to get to you by road. Right? Road is the finishing element of almost every single transport. We often see these small vans or delivery vehicles or trucks arriving at our grocery stores, at the markets, at our homes. So the end point of almost any of these types of transport is road, and so there it has the greatest access. Right? Roads are almost everywhere these days, and there are very few locations that they don't reach, and they are almost always the end point. So they have the greatest access of any of these locations. Of any of these possibilities of transport. Now, I would say shipping is second most, and one could argue that in certain places it's number one, because water occupies 2/3 of our planet, and many of the most important industrial centers and population centers are on the coasts. We also have navigable and commercial rivers like the Danube, which we see in Novi Sad here. So, because of navigable rivers and locks and dams and lakes and channels and the seas and the oceans, shipping has large-scale access to most population centers. There are landlocked places that have no option for water transport, but it reaches most of the world. So, and also you can get to it pretty easily. If you want things transported by car, it's pretty easy to get them on there. If you want things transported by ship, it's probably a little more regulated. But you have a lot more points you have at least just as many points of access or a similar amount. And then when it comes to access, the two left are rail and air. And that's not a surprise. Those with the greatest security have the least access. So train stations take more infrastructure than roads do, and rail takes more infrastructure than roads being built do. So rail has the second worst access, or is in third place of the four, because it's expensive to build, it takes a lot of investment, and there are fewer train stations than there are, ports or roads. So that would mean, and then of course, in order to get access to the goods, you might need permission or oversight or regulation. So that makes them less accessible than road or shipping. And then finally, we have air, the most inaccessible. There are just fewer airports than there are any other access point to other forms of transport. I mean, look at Serbia. Where is Novi Sad's airport? That's right, we don't have one. We go to Belgrade. So in countries like ours, while there is a niche airport, somewhat functional, really it's Belgrade. And so if you want to ship your items or your goods, you have to go by air, then that's your only option in this country. And even in there are just fewer airports, so they have the least amount of access. And then getting your goods onto air also has to go through a lot of security checkpoints, which makes them the least accessible. So, like I said, this all leads up to cost. And if you think about like how many first places these various types of transport have, that can lead to, which one is the most costly. And air transport is the most costly. You get speed and you get security, and you're going to pay for it. So that's clearly the most costly. I would say that rail and road are somewhat comparable, and they're kind of the middle. And then the cheap option is shipping. It's the least secure, and it's the slowest, so you get what you pay for. Then the one great advantage of shipping is that there are restrictions to how much an airplane can hold. There are restrictions to how much a truck can hold on the road, or even the amount a road can take. And you often see that listed on signs, like no trucks above 10 tons allowed here. And rail clearly has restrictions because of the rail size. That's where shipping has its great advantage. You can ship anything. Really, you ship containers all over the world. You have container ships carrying thousands and thousands of containers, which can never be transported any other way. This is why aircraft carriers exist. They're holding entire airports on them. You have cruise vessels holding cities worth of people on them, it's seemingly at times. So while it's the cheapest, it's also the least restrictive in terms of what you can ship. So it's the number one option for large amounts of commercial goods, as long as those goods are not perishable or too perishable, which means they can go bad in a short amount of time. So I will be posting notes along with these elements, and I hope this gives you a good understanding of some of the nuances of packaging and storage that were already visited in the main lecture and partially visited in our material, but here with a more industrial understanding. And as far as transport goes, I think that hopefully this discussion and evaluation of the major forms of transport based on these factors, cost, speed, access, security, and amounts or restrictions, has given us greater insight into what are the most advantageous methods of transportation and why. And so if you were to ship, particular items, then these are all things you would have to think about. You'd have to think about, how am I going to package those individually for commercial purposes? In what kind of larger package are they going to go for industrial transport? Do they need storage along the way? And how am I getting my goods from one place to another? And so every time you make a shipment, those are all the things you have to think about. And that's why I kind of unified them into one video. So this week, there is actually no assignment. I'm not going to make you ship your items. If you did so, you would probably need something like an invoice, which is similar to an order. That's also defined in your book, so I don't think I need to comment on that further. And we're getting close to the end of the semester, so next week we're really getting into our final theme. We're going to step away from our individual businesses and return a little bit to the big scale. So I'll be posting new material next week about that, and there will be assignment related to that. But for this week, review the notes that I'll post related to packaging and containers, storage, and transport, and just be familiar with them. Could come in handy for colloquiums and exams down the line. So, till then, stay safe. We'll be having a video Q&A session in the coming days, and I'll be posting when that is. And if you have questions about anything I mentioned in this video or the notes that I post or other material, then we'll have an opportunity to comment then. In the meantime, good luck.